At my own wedding, right between the vows and the applause, my mother smiled like she owned the room and said, "We're passing the penthouses his parents gave you over to your sister." My sister laughed, flicked her hair, and added, "Relax. It's just a car." And my groom. My one safe place that day just stared at them like he couldn't believe the audacity. In that moment, it felt like my entire childhood repeated itself in a single breath. Me losing something, them taking it without shame, everyone expecting me to stay quiet. My name is Ziria, and this is the moment I realized my family never came to celebrate me. They came to collect what they thought they were owed. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes knowing someone is out there makes all the difference. And if my story touches you, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters. It means more than you know. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. At my wedding, the string lights above the rooftop garden glowed like a promise I'd finally earned. I stood there in my white dress, fingers laced with Dawson's, listening to the officiant recite the last lines of our vows. The sun was melting into the Austin skyline, jazz played softly behind us, and for a moment I honestly believed my life was shifting into something gentler. When I looked over at my family's row, my mother Rowena was smiling with that polished, performative glow she used whenever a camera was near. My sister Sable was posing like the whole event existed for her Instagram feed, and my father, true to form, was staring down at his phone, typing something that couldn't possibly be more important than his daughter getting married. I swallowed that familiar sting, telling myself it didn't matter. I'd survived years of chaos and scraping money together just to stay afloat. Today was supposed to be the day I stepped out of that old life and into something that finally felt like mine. Then came the moment the Hale family presented their wedding gift. Dawson's mother stood elegant and proud and announced that they were giving us a penthouse at Hale Tower, a place for the newlyweds to build a life. My throat tightened. No one had ever given me a space that was truly mine. When Dawson leaned in and whispered, "You deserve this," I believed him. I believed all of it. Until my mother asked for the microphone. She walked to the center as if she were part of the program, flashed a smile bright enough to cut glass, and said, "The Calloway family discussed it already. We've decided the penthouse should go to Sable first, just until she's stable. Ziria's always been generous." The guests shifted. I froze. Sable laughed, loud, delighted, unbothered. "Relax, sis. It's like when you got that car. Let me use it for now." Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't surprise. It was recognition. I'd lived this pattern my entire life, something meant for me being handed off to someone else without anyone even asking if I wanted it. Before I could breathe, Dawson stepped forward, letting go of my hand. His voice dropped into a level calm I'd only heard in boardrooms and emergencies. "The penthouse is legally in my wife's name. No one decides what happens to it except her." My mother chuckled like he was a child misunderstanding adult matters. In a family, paperwork doesn't matter. Love does. My father avoided my eyes completely. I heard whispers moving through the crowd like smoke, and even with the music still playing, the whole evening felt hollowed out. I stood on that stage while everyone kept smiling, but inside, I was spiraling back into every moment I'd lost something to my family, simply because they believed they had the right to take it. I slipped away from the reception under the excuse of fixing my makeup, but really, I just needed air. The hallway behind the venue was lined with black and white photos of other newlyweds, happy, uncomplicated strangers frozen in time, while my reflection in the window looked like someone bracing for impact. I sank onto a bench staring out at the city lights, and wondering why the pain I felt didn't even surprise me. It felt rehearsed, like a scene I had lived 100 times before. My mind dragged me backward. I was 19 again, juggling 2 part-time jobs and a full course load, when my mother called crying because the power was about to be shut off. I transferred everything in my savings account to her, without hesitation, skipping the laptop I had saved for over months. She called me her guardian angel, and I carried that praise like a medal, believing love was something you bought your way into. After that came the bills: water, internet, car insurance for Sable, because she needs help getting started, tuition for a semester she didn't attend, gas money that somehow turned into her weekend trip to the coast. When my father slipped on the driveway and ended up in the ER, I paid the bill only to see him on Facebook 2 days later, drinking beer with his buddies at a football party. The one time I tried to say no was when my mother asked for help with the down payment on a new house. I told her I couldn't. I needed that money for my internship move to Austin. She didn't yell. She just went silent for 2 days, then texted, "If you can't help, it's fine. At least Sable still remembers family." Panic swallowed me whole. I transferred the money within the hour. After that, I stopped trying to draw boundaries. Sitting in that hallway in my wedding dress, I finally understood why my mother felt so comfortable standing up in front of 100 guests and handing my penthouse to my sister. In her mind, anything I had was simply a resource waiting to be redistributed. A memory flickered, one from just a few months before. Dawson was at my apartment when my mother FaceTimed asking if I could pay off her credit card just this once. I ended the call with a practiced smile and told him, "It's fine, they don't have anyone else." He didn't argue, but his silence stretched long enough that I felt it. I told myself things would change after the wedding, that I'd finally have room to breathe, that my family would lean on me less. Now I saw how naive that was. Something else ghosted through my thoughts, an unread email I'd glimpsed years ago titled, "Trust Fund, Grandma." I'd asked my mother about the money my grandmother supposedly left me, and she brushed it off with, "We used everything for the family." I never questioned it. I believed her then. But after what happened on that rooftop, I felt the first real tremor of doubt. And as I sat in that hallway, the noise of the wedding muffled behind the walls, I realized this wasn't just another moment of being used. It was the moment my entire past began lining up in front of me, asking to be re-examined. By the time I pulled myself together enough to stand up from that hallway bench, my cheeks were dry, but my chest felt raw. I could still hear the muffled beat of music and laughter through the wall, like the party belonged to someone else. Dawson found me there, framed in the doorway, still in his suit, bow tie slightly loosened. He didn't ask why I'd disappeared. His eyes already knew. "Let's go upstairs for a bit," he said quietly. "I don't want you sitting out there being polite to people who don't deserve you." I let him take my hand and lead me into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, the noise of the reception dropped away, and it was just the soft hum of the lift and my heartbeat in my ears. I stared at our reflections in the brushed metal, thinking how wrong it was that I was walking away from my own wedding because my family couldn't stand to see me have something that was mine. In the private suite, I kicked off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed, my feet aching, my fingers still curled like I was bracing for another hit. Dawson poured me a glass of water and handed it to me, then sank into the chair across from me, elbows on his knees. "I'm sorry," he said. "I knew they'd go after the penthouse. I just didn't think they'd do it on a microphone." The word "knew" snagged in my mind. "What do you mean you knew?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second, then let out a breath. "Your mom called me last week. She said it would make more sense if the penthouse were in your family's name. Not just yours and mine. All of you. She kept talking about how it would be easier to manage that way." My stomach went cold. "You didn't tell me, because it was the week before our wedding," he said. "I told her no. I told her the place was for you, period. I thought that was the end of it. I didn't want to dump that on you right before you walked down the aisle." I pressed my palms into the comforter, remembering the way my mother had smiled on that stage, like everything she was doing was normal. This wasn't an impulsive comment. This was them testing him first, and when he wouldn't bend, they just moved to the next tactic. "So they tried to get you on board first," I said slowly. "And when that didn't work, they just..." announced it anyway. He got up and sat beside me. Zai, my parents didn't give us that place so your family could fight over it. They gave it to you because they know you've never really had a home that was yours. His voice softened, and suddenly I was back in the memory of the first night he took me to Hale Tower. He'd told me we were just checking out a new property of his dad's firm. We rode the elevator to almost the top, and when the doors opened there, it was an empty penthouse washed in evening light windows spilling Austin's skyline into the room. No furniture, no boxes, no clutter, just space and quiet. "I want this to be your place," he'd said then. "Somewhere you can sleep without worrying. Your phone is going to ring with another bill or emergency that isn't yours." I hadn't meant to cry that night, but the tears came anyway, because the idea of a roof over my head that didn't come with strings or invoices was almost too big to hold. Back on the hotel bed, I wiped at a tear I hadn't realized had slipped loose. "Your mom looked so shocked when mine said what she said," I murmured. "She meant this for us. For me. And they just treated it like some car they could pass around." Dawson nodded. "My parents have seen enough of your family's patterns to be cautious," he admitted. "My dad is the one who insisted we lock everything down. The deed is in your name only. Any change to ownership has to be done in person with you there in front of a notary. No email, no phone call, no accidental switch." That was the first time I'd heard the specifics. He went on. "He also asked our attorney to set up tracking on the digital records. Any time someone tries to access the file, it's logged. Where, when, what device. It's all there." I let that sink in. While my own parents had spent years pulling me into their financial storms, this man's parents had quietly been building walls around me so I wouldn't get drowned again. "So if anyone tries to mess with it," I said slowly, "there'd be proof." "Exactly," he said. He reached for my hand again. "I'm not trying to scare you. I just want you to know you're not crazy for feeling like something's off. They've already tested the boundaries once. I don't think they're done." There was a time when hearing that would have sent me straight back into denial. Tonight, it just made the room feel sharper, more in focus. "I don't want you caught in the middle," I whispered. "Too late," he said with a small, tired smile. "I married you. Middle is where I live now, and I'm okay with that." I leaned my head on his shoulder and stared at the city lights beyond the glass. For the first time in my life, I had two sets of parents in my orbit, one pair who saw my stability as a resource to drain, and another who quietly hired lawyers to protect me. The penthouse wasn't just a fancy address. It was a line in the sand, a promise carved into concrete, and contracts that said, "This belongs to you." My mother had tried to erase that in front of 100 people, like it was nothing. As I sat there in the dim hotel suite, wrapped in my wedding dress and my husband's arms, I understood something else, too. If this turned into a battle, I wouldn't be standing on that field alone. I just had no idea how far my family was willing to go to win a game I never agreed to play. A knock at the door and a text from his mom eventually pulled us back to reality. There was a dinner downstairs. A quick bite both families had agreed to, so we could smooth things over. Part of me wanted to stay locked in that room forever, but another part knew running would just leave the story unfinished. I straightened my dress, slid my feet back into my shoes, and met Dawson's eyes in the mirror. "Let's go see what version of the truth they're bringing to the table," I said. The steakhouse was one of those places with dim golden lighting and framed photos of cattle ranches on the walls, the kind of restaurant where business deals get sealed over rare steaks and expensive wine. We were led to a private room with a long table set for 12. It looked less like a family dinner and more like a summit. I sat between Dawson and his mother, trying to ignore how cold my hands felt on the white tablecloth. My parents and Sable arrived 20 minutes late. My mother blaming the traffic, then laughing that weddings take it out of you. She didn't look wrung out. She looked like someone walking into a meeting she believed she controlled. Dawson's mom was the first to speak once everyone settled. "Rowena," she began gently about what happened upstairs. Announcing a change to the penthouse like that without even speaking to Ziria or to us first. It was deeply disrespectful. I dropped my gaze to my lap, hoping just for a second that my mother would finally say the words I'd never heard in my life. "I'm sorry." Instead, she laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, come on. You know how close our family is. Ziria has always been generous. She grew up understanding that we share what we have." I was just speaking on what we'd already talked about as a family. Sable leaned forward, eyes bright. "Exactly. My life's been all over the place. I'm just asking for a little stability. My sister always had more opportunities anyway." That line hit me like a slap. More opportunities. I thought of every graveyard shift I'd pulled to pay their bills, every internship I barely afforded, because I was sending what I could back home. There had never been a single thing handed to me, but in my sister's mind, my exhaustion looked like privilege. Dawson's jaw tightened. "The penthouse is not a community resource," he said. His voice stayed even, but I could feel the anger under it. "My parents gifted it to my wife, not to the Calloway family." My father finally looked up from the menu as if the conversation had finally reached a topic he cared about. "Let's not blow this out of proportion," he said. "One daughter gets the penthouse, the other gets the car. It evens out. Why make a big deal?" I felt something in my chest twist at the way he said it, like I was a column on a balance sheet he was trying to make tidy. Dawson's mother leaned closer to me, then addressed my mother again. "This isn't about things," she said. "It's about the way you spoke over your daughter's life, like she wasn't standing right there." My mother's smile faded a fraction. "In a family, things should be shared," she insisted. "The world out there is obsessed with paperwork and titles. Inside these walls, we have each other. That's what matters." I heard what she didn't say out loud, that in her eyes, anything I had was automatically part of inside these walls, whether I liked it or not. I lifted my head. "You didn't ask me," I said quietly. "You never asked what I wanted, Mom." She shrugged. "I know you. You would have said yes anyway. I was just speeding things up." There it was, spoken plainly. My consent wasn't necessary because she'd already decided I'd give it. Dawson exhaled slowly. "Since we're being honest," he said, "this wasn't the first time the topic came up. Last week you called me Rowena. You suggested putting the penthouse under the Calloway family name so it would be easier to manage. I told you that wasn't going to happen." The room went silent. My fork clinked against my plate. My mother's expression froze, then shifted into something cooler. "I was brainstorming," she said. "Trying to find a structure that made sense. If the whole family benefits, why not reflect that on paper?" "Because the gift wasn't to the whole family," Dawson's dad said, speaking for the first time. "It was to our son and to Ziria. We don't owe anyone else a roof." My mother's eyes flashed. "We've poured everything into that girl," she snapped. "We sacrificed so much. The least she can do is remember where she came from and help her sister stand." I thought of the nights I'd cried in silence on a cheap mattress while my paycheck went to keep their lights on, and Sable's gas tank full. Sacrifice in her mouth sounded like a story she'd told herself so often she believed it. I waited for my father to step in to calm her down, to steer things toward some kind of peace. Instead, he went back to his earlier logic. "You kids are starting your lives. Sable's still trying to get her footing. Sharing doesn't hurt anyone. The car, the place, it's all just stuff." To him, the home I'd been promised was just another object to shuffle around a favor owed to the daughter who'd never once lifted their financial load. Sable crossed her arms. "It's not like I'm asking to steal it forever," she said. "Just until I'm on my feet. You're with Dawson, you'll be fine. You always land on your feet, Z." That was the part that stung the most, the assumption that because I'd survived everything they dumped on me, I could absorb one more loss without breaking. That I was built to carry what they could not. I felt the room tilting, the lines drawn more clearly than they'd ever been. On one side of the table were people who saw the penthouse as a promise, a sanctuary for me and Dawson. On the other were people who saw it as a convenient asset to redistribute. No one on that side said the words I kept waiting for. No one even tried. By the time the plates arrived, my appetite was gone. I watched my mother charm the waiter, watched Sable snap photos of her dinner, watched my father make small talk with Dawson's dad about the stock market like our lives weren't cracking open on that white tablecloth. I sat there in my wedding dress in a private room that felt more like a courtroom and realized that this was who they were when someone finally drew a line they couldn't cross. They didn't apologize. They didn't reflect. They just doubled down and called it love. When the check was paid and everyone started to stand, Dawson squeezed my knee under the table. I met his eyes and saw the same exhausted clarity I felt. Whatever was happening with that penthouse, whatever they thought they were entitled to this, wasn't over. For the first time, though, I also understood something else. I was no longer the only one in the room willing to say so out loud. The morning after the wedding felt nothing like a newlywed morning. Instead of waking up slow and warm beside my husband, I sat in the passenger seat of his car with my stomach knotted, heading toward the glass building of Harrison Boyd. The sun was barely over the horizon, but the heat was already rising, making the whole city shimmer, like it knew something was about to crack open. Dawson reached over and squeezed my knee. "You don't have to be scared," he said softly. But I was. I wasn't scared of his parents or mine. I was scared of what the truth might force me to admit, that my family hadn't just humiliated me. They'd crossed lines I didn't want to imagine. Inside the law office, everything smelled like polished wood and old money. Harris greeted us with that calm, professional tone I used to hear only in TV dramas. He sat us down in a conference room, flipped open his laptop, and asked for my signature to authorize a system audit. My hand shook as I signed my own name, which felt ridiculous. It was my penthouse. My life. Why was I trembling at the idea of seeing who had tried to get into my records? Harris typed quickly, clicking through encrypted portals. Then the room got quiet. He turned the laptop so we could see. "There were 2 access attempts to the Hale Tower property file the week before your wedding." My breath caught. He clicked again. Both came from the same IP address, registered in Round Rock. Dawson stiffened beside me. My hometown. My house. My family. I felt my throat tighten as I tried to search for excuses. "Maybe it's a glitch," I whispered. "Or maybe they clicked something by accident. They don't really understand technology." Dawson didn't say anything. He just watched me with an expression that hurt more than anything. He looked like someone who wished the truth weren't what it obviously was. Harris continued. "There's more. The system saved a working draft of a property transfer form. The beneficiary listed is Sable Calloway." My heart dropped. There it was. Not a theory. Not a fear. Evidence. The requested by line was blank, a deliberate move meant to hide the identity of the person initiating it. And the timestamp, the night before my wedding. My knees went weak. I excused myself before I fell apart right at the conference table. In the elevator down to the parking garage, I held onto the rail with both hands just to stay upright. Once I got into the car, I blasted the air conditioning even though I was shivering. My whole body felt like it was rejecting every memory I'd ever convinced myself was harmless. Dawson climbed in beside me quietly, buckling his seatbelt before leaning over to take my hand. "You're not dealing with this alone," he said. "Not anymore." My chest tightened in a way that wasn't quite crying, not quite breathing. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But every instinct I had was telling me to brace for more. Back upstairs, Harris called Dawson privately as we reached the garage exit. I watched Dawson's face change, shoulders tense, jaw tightening. When he hung up, he didn't speak right away. I could feel the truth sitting between us like a weight. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, brushed his thumb across my knuckles. "Nothing you need to worry about yet." But I saw the lie in his eyes. I didn't press him. Not then. On the drive home, the only thing I could think about was that IP address blinking in my mind like a warning light. Round Rock. My childhood house. My mother's laptop. Sable's tablet. My father's old desktop. I kept hearing my mother's voice saying paperwork doesn't matter in family, and suddenly the sentence twisted into something darker. Something that sounded a lot like permission. By the time we reached the penthouse, the sunrise had turned into a harsh daylight that made everything too clear. I tried to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew the truth. What happened on the wedding stage wasn't the peak of anything. It was just the beginning of whatever storm my family had already set in motion. By evening, the weight of everything we'd uncovered sat so heavy in my chest that I couldn't go another hour without facing them. Dawson tried to talk me out of it, but I told him I needed to hear them say the truth or lie to my face. Either way, I needed to see it. So I drove to Round Rock, rehearsing my questions over and over, even though nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. My mother opened the door with a bright smile like she was greeting a neighbor dropping off borrowed sugar. Sweetheart. Look at you still glowing from the wedding. She stepped aside to let me in, as if the last 24 hours hadn't happened at all. The living room smelled like microwaved leftovers and citrus cleaner. I stood just inside the doorway, clutching my purse like armor. I know someone tried to access the penthouse records, I said. It came from this address. Her smile flickered but didn't disappear. Oh, please. You know this house has terrible internet. Probably some glitch. We don't even know how to get into those fancy systems. A blatant lie. My mother had been stalking my social media and editing family photos for a decade. Before I could respond, Sable came out of the kitchen holding a can of sparkling water. When I said the access happened the night before the wedding, she snapped too fast. I wasn't even here that night. I was at Hannah's. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't said anything about it being at night. My father sat in his recliner, eyes glued to the TV, though the screen was dark. His hand was wrapped around a half-finished beer, and I noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. He wouldn't look at me. Not once. He knew. Or he didn't stop them. I wasn't sure which hurt more. My gaze drifted to the coffee table and froze. A printed document sat half-tucked under a home decor magazine. I recognized the header instantly, property transfer draft. And there in the middle of the page was my name spelled wrong. I never misspelled my own name, but my mother had. More than once. The room shrank around me. I lifted the paper silently and held it up. My mother's smile tightened. You shouldn't snoop, Ziria. That's rude. I almost laughed. You were planning to take my home. And I'm the one being rude. She stepped forward, her expression sharpening. Don't let that fancy family turn you against us. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. Don't start acting like we're enemies. I turned away. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. I headed for the front door, swallowing the ache in my throat. My mother followed, still talking, her voice rising. Don't let them drive a wedge between us. Families share. That's how it's always worked. Outside, the air was humid and heavy. I was halfway to my car when I heard a soft voice call my name. Mrs. Meredith, our neighbor, stood by her mailbox. She glanced toward my house, then stepped closer. I probably shouldn't say anything, she whispered, but the night before your wedding, I heard your mother and sister arguing in the garage. Something about signing something before morning. They were yelling pretty loud. The world went silent for a moment. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Are you sure? I managed to ask. She nodded. I didn't understand everything, but it sounded urgent, like they needed it done quickly. I thanked her and walked to my car on unsteady legs. When I closed the door and sat behind the wheel, the memory of Sable's too quick denial replayed in my mind. The printed draft. The misspelled name. My father's trembling hands. My mother's hollow reassurances. The neighbor's whispered warning. It all lined up too perfectly. I stared through the windshield at the dimming sky, my chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I had wanted the truth. Now I had it. And it was so much worse than anything I'd prepared myself for. Driving away from that house, I didn't feel like a daughter leaving her childhood home. I felt like someone escaping a place she should have run from years ago. The email came just after sunrise, the notification lighting up my phone on the nightstand. I was half awake, still caught between a bad dream and the memory of driving away from my parents' house the night before. The subject line snapped me fully into the present signature mismatch: transfer attempt. It was from Harris. My fingers went cold as I opened it. The message was short, clinical, full of attached PDFs and phrases like inconsistency and further review recommended. At the bottom was a line that made my stomach twist. Preliminary analysis indicates the signature on the attempted transfer does not match your verified records. I tapped on the first attachment, and there it was. My name, or something almost like it scrawled across a digital form. It looked like a bad imitation of me. The slant was off the letters, formed with a hesitation that didn't belong to my hand. I forwarded the email to Dawson and asked if he was awake. He walked into the living room a minute later, still in a t-shirt and joggers, hair a mess, but eyes sharp. We sat together on the couch as he read. "Harris is 90% sure it's forged," he said quietly. "He's sending it to a handwriting specialist to confirm, but it's bad Zai." My phone buzzed again. Another email from Harris. "While reviewing historic records connected to your profile, we located a prior transaction of concern." It read, "Year, 22nd birthday year. Source trust fund established by your grandmother. Amount $40,000. Authorization appears signed under your name. Spelling of name matches recent transfer attempt, not official records. $40,000. A number big enough to knock the air out of me." I stared at the document he'd attached. Same wrong spelling in the signature block. Same clumsy version of my name. I tried to remember ever seeing this before, and came up empty. Then a different memory surfaced, hazy but sharp around the edges. The day before my college graduation, my mother had shown up on campus with a folder in her hand and a tight smile. Some leftover scholarship paperwork, she'd said, rushing me as I tugged on my gown. "They messed something up with your financial aid. They just need you to sign off so it closes clean." I'd scribbled my name on a few lines in the hallway outside the auditorium, barely glancing at the text because I was late, and she was insistent, and I trusted her. Afterward, she had hugged me and whispered, "You're going to make this family proud." I'd never seen those pages again. I opened another email from Harris. This one had still images from bank security footage attached. In the grainy photo, my mother was walking into a branch lobby, head held high, purse tucked under her arm. Beside her, a younger woman in a loose jacket, hat, and mask, just enough of her visible to show familiar height and posture. Based on the timeline and account data, we believe this visit is connected to the trust fund withdrawal, Harris wrote. The secondary individual's identity is unclear, though the build suggests a family member. Possibly your sister. The room seemed to tilt. That half-remembered scholarship paperwork. The email about trust fund. Grandma I'd once seen in my inbox before my mother told me not to worry about it. The rickety way my name appeared on legal forms I had never read. The draft transfer to Sable. All of it stacked up into something I could no longer excuse as confusion or bad communication. I spent the rest of the day moving from room to room in the penthouse, unable to sit still. Every corner of that place, every clean wall, every view of the city felt like a protest against the life they were trying to drag me back into. They hadn't just tried to steal this home. Years earlier, they had already succeeded with something else, and I had walked around for years thinking there was nothing left for me from my grandmother but warm memories and a few recipes. That night, I lay awake, listening to the air conditioner hum. Dawson slept with one arm stretched protectively toward my side of the bed, his fingers grazing the sheet where my hand should have been. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the footage in my head. My mother at the bank, a girl who moved like me, but wasn't me, a signature that looked like mine, only if you squinted through love and denial. At some point, fear gave way to something hotter, cleaner. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. They had taken my money, my safety, my trust. I wasn't going to let them take my future, too. By the time dawn pressed a gray light against the windows, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And for the first time, I was ready to break it, even if it meant tearing down what was left of the family I thought I had. The storm rolled in just after midnight, the kind that makes the whole city feel smaller, as if the clouds are pressing down on the rooftops. Rain hammered the windows of the penthouse, and thunder rumbled somewhere over the river. I was curled up on the couch in an old hoodie document spread out on the coffee table, when the intercom buzzed hard enough to make me jump. "Who is it?" I asked, hitting the screen. The camera feed blinked on, showing the building's front entrance. My mother and Sable stood there in the downpour, soaked through, mascara streaked, clinging to each other like the rain alone had done this to them. My heart kicked once in my chest, then steadied. I pressed the button to let them into the lobby, then waited by our door. When the knock came, it was frantic. I opened just enough to see their faces. My mother's lipstick was smeared, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Sable's eyes were red, whether from crying or the weather I couldn't tell. "You have to call that lawyer off," my mother said, skipping hello entirely. "The bank accounts are frozen. Your father's paycheck got held. We can't pay the mortgage. This has gone too far." Sable stepped forward, voice breaking. "You're ruining us, Z. Do you understand that you're tearing this family apart over some misunderstanding?" The word misunderstanding landed like an insult. I thought of the forged signatures, the missing trust fund, the draft move to switch my home into my sister's name. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "You used my name. You took my inheritance. You tried to take my house. And you never once thought you owed me an explanation." My mother's mouth trembled, but not from remorse. "Your grandmother's money was for the family," she snapped. "We only moved it because we were in trouble. We always meant to make it right. If you hadn't dragged lawyers into this, none of this would be happening. You brought this on us." The blame hit me with a dull, familiar weight, but it didn't sink in the way it used to. "I brought this on you by asking what happened to my own money," I said, "by refusing to let you steal my home on my wedding day." She shook her head, eyes wild. "You're letting them poison you against us. That boy and his rich parents. You think they care about you more than we do. We did what we had to do. Any parent would." Behind her, Sable's composure cracked. "I only signed for you because you wouldn't come help Mom," she blurted. My breath caught. There it was, plain and ugly and undeniable. Her face paled, realizing what she'd admitted out loud, but she didn't take it back. Dawson appeared at my shoulder, then steady and solid. He opened the door wider and stepped in front of me, holding a folder in his hand. "You shouldn't be here," he said evenly. "The court orders have already been issued. The accounts are frozen while they investigate, and any further contact about the case needs to go through counsel." He handed my mother copies of the notices. "No one is forcing Ziria to sign anything ever again." My mother stared at the papers like they were written in another language. "You're really going to stand there and hide behind strangers instead of helping your own blood?" she demanded, looking over his shoulder at me. "This is your family falling apart, and you're letting it happen." My phone buzzed in my pocket. My father's name flashed across the screen. I almost declined it, but something in me needed to hear his voice. I answered. His words tumbled out low and shaky. "Zai, honey, please. You have to fix this. Your mom. She used the money to cover a gambling debt. It was for someone who could have hurt us. We were cornered. You don't understand how bad it was." I closed my eyes. For a second, I saw him not as the quiet man in the recliner, but as someone who had watched this train race toward the edge and never once pulled the brake. "So you knew," I said softly. "All this time you knew." There was a long silence on the line. "We thought we'd pay it back," he whispered. "We thought you wouldn't have to know." That was the final cut. The idea that the worst thing in their minds wasn't taking from me, but me finding out. I lifted the phone from my ear, ignoring his voice, and hit end. My mother was still talking, pleading now, promising things she had no power to promise. Sable was crying that she would lose everything, as if I hadn't already lost enough. I felt strangely calm. "I helped you for as long as I can remember," I said. "I paid your bills. I covered your mistakes. I let you use my future as collateral without even knowing it. You chose to use my name, my money, and my trust, like they were disposable. I'm choosing to stop." My mother reached for the door, trying to wedge her foot inside. Dawson gently blocked her. I met her eyes one last time. "I'm done, Mom," I said. "I'm not going to save you from the consequences of what you did. Not this time." I closed the door on her protests, on Sable's sobs, on the sound of knuckles hitting wood. I stood there for a long moment, my back against the door, listening to the storm outside, and the storm in the hallway gradually fade. For the first time, their cries didn't pull me back. They echoed off the walls and fell away. When the building finally went quiet, I walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass, the city lights blurred and trembling beyond it. Somewhere out there, my parents were realizing the safety net they'd always counted on had vanished. Somewhere inside me, a different realization was taking root. I had not destroyed my family. They had done that themselves, piece by piece, every time they chose desperation and entitlement over honesty. All I had done at last was step out from under the wreckage.